And the blinding change came to me when I thought, well, do you know what? Actually, the story would be much stronger if it wasn't the Phantom who'd asked her to New York. If in fact it was somebody else, and if it was Oscar Hammerstein, that's factually correct, because Oscar if you go back to the book that Freddie Forsyth did as a sketch, Freddie got the idea really, I think, rather brilliantly right, which was that it was in fact Hammerstein who asked her to America, because you see at that time there was a very interesting situation, because the Metropolitan Opera House had opened, but in fact there was a lot of resentment about that, because if you weren't completely posh or you didn't have the money, you couldn't get in there. And what Hammerstein did is he opened a rival opera house to the Met, and he called it the Manhattan Opera House. And that's where, I think he was Dame Melba, isn't it? I can get her name wrong, Freudian there somewhere. She opened it, and I just thought, what a fantastic idea if it was Christine who opened it. And that's where we're so I don't know. I mean, I think that sometimes to work on something is right. I mean, we had a very, very strange situation, as you probably know, which was that we had an extraordinary thing. And I mean, I don't know how many of you know about, I suppose, the opera claque, which was, you know, always the great problems when people opened opera 100 years ago. And there were always these rival claques, and there were all these people who were the equivalent, I suppose, in a way, of the internet. And we didn't realise until about 5 days into the show starting that there were people posting negative reviews about the show, which simply were not possible. They were not possible because, it was all too late, because I wasn't on the case of this. I frankly don't have a computer, and I don't have a mobile phone. I did have a mobile phone once, which I got so angry with because it didn't get me to where I was going to, so I plug it on the M1. So that's the height of my, I'm afraid, my technology. But the thing is, we were screwed, frankly, by that. Absolutely screwed. And we didn't know where it was coming from. And eventually, it was an investigative journalist who was on the Daily Telegraph who came to me about 4 months afterwards and said the whole thing came from a couple of people in Toronto who had a serving base in Utah, of all places, and the whole thing was cooked up. Now, of course, you're going to have people, and I'm sure some of you may have criticisms about the show, but what we had was a whole thing of people who were writing about the show who never had even seen it. And that was the extraordinary thing. But coming back to that, I mean, coming back to your question, is that, you know, in many ways though, when you've got an opportunity, when people say certain things about something, I came back to something I remember from when I was a child, which was a story I was told about Madame Butterfly. And Puccini's Madame Butterfly, when it opened, was booed off stage, completely and totally booed off stage. And he brought his entire family and everything, saying that he thought he was going to be his complete triumph. And it was just disaster. But he immediately realised that although there had been the equivalent of the kind of internet kind of claque, he immediately realised, though, that there was something the matter. And I thought, you know, I think in his case it was the humming chorus or something lasted about 25 minutes, and people sort of felt that humming was not a terribly good idea for 25 minutes, Japanese or not. But I thought, you know what, I've got to go back over this, and what have I got wrong? And you know, I think now what I've got is the show that really in many ways, and it's very difficult for Summer and Sierra to listen to this because they were involved with me on the album, and we were all with it as a kind of family from the very, very word go. But I think that the construction of the show possibly wasn't right, and that the Hammerstein point was a good one. And I'm going to stop talking because I think it's very
Well, we love your show anyway.
Well,
We love the first version, but we love this one.
I think it is. I mean, do you think it's better?
Yeah. The flow's a lot better, and
it's a lot more
made
emotional.
Criticisms beforehand, but this is my first time of seeing with the improvements, and now, like I said, I wouldn't have thought of any bad points before, but now it seems far more coherent and smooth, and with the extra touches of the previous Phantom as well. Tears.
Well, I was always worried about that, you know, whether to use
I didn't see it as a big problem before, but it just adds to the wonderful. So, you know, it doesn't work. Yeah. So if you want everyone blubbing on the way out,
That's what
Anyway, it was a very, very difficult decision for me to do the show, really, because obviously, it was a very personal thing for me. I suppose that Christine is the character that I most have cared about, who I've ever written about or for, and therefore what happens at the end of the show was almost impossible. I mean, there were moments where, when we were recording it, when we finished it, and we finally did it, I could never actually listen to the end of the show. And do you know what? I've only once seen the end of the show because I can't bear to watch it.
I'm right here!
You don't sing at the last bit.
Oh, it's all
But, you know, it's always too much in it for me. Anyway, listen, look, thank you for coming. And any other questions at all? I mean, if you've got anything else?
Are you going to re-record it?
Well, that's an extremely good question.